Thank you so much for meeting. I wanted to have an opportunity to kind of explain the method to the madness and make sure that what we were providing is the sort of information that you needed. And if we needed to go a different direction or additional directions, we wanted to kind of lay out what those directions might be. Would you like me to kind of walk through the document and then
That'd
go?
be lovely. Yes, I have it recorded. So I want to share this with a lot of math and science colleagues who have asked me about it.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
yeah, that'd be lovely. Yes, please.
Sure. Okay. Well, what we did initially when you sent in this request, we were talking about STEM students. And one of the challenges that we have right now at MiraCosta is that STEM covers multiple areas. And whether we're talking about dean's areas or we're talking about ACPs, there's bits and pieces of them in different places. And some folks use the terminology STEAM, so they want to include components of the arts. One of the things that I think we need to do as an institution is have very clear definitions of what we mean when we say, okay, a STEM student or a STEAM student. I think that will go a long way to kind of help clarify what we're talking about here. The other challenge is that we have a tendency to think of students in a very linear fashion. They enroll at the college, they tell us their major, and then they take their courses and either get their degree, certificate, or transfer, or they don't get it at all, and we don't see them again. The reality is that students are all over the place.
They are,
They
yes.
frequently will change their majors. And we'll talk a little bit about the requirements for reporting a major at MiraCosta and how it does or does not tie to the courses they take. And so some of those things can make a report like this a little bit of a challenge because we can't say definitively that A plus B equals C. So that was kind of where we started. So in talking about definitions, since we didn't have a clear definition of what we meant by STEM, we decided to use a proxy for that and say, okay, any student who identifies as being, through their major, a part of the math and sciences ACP, that's the population of students that we're talking about. And we took the guided pathways cohorts from 11-12 to 19-20 and followed them over time. Um, that's one of the things. That way, we're talking about first-time college students who don't have any prior college experience, except for potentially some courses that students may have taken as concurrently enrolled high school students. Those students are included. But if I start at Palomar and then come to MiraCosta, I'm not included in these groups. So the first thing we did is we wanted to look at the breakdown of students' majors and figure out what portion of our campus community do the math and sciences students make up. And we're talking about their first ACP when we're having these conversations in this case. And there will be times where we'll change the definition a little bit, but we explain it. So a student fills out their application. They may or may not have had a chance to talk to a counselor. They're just telling us what their interest is at that point in time. So it is possible for that to change. But we start here with their first reported ACP, and along the top, we have all of the different guided pathways cohorts. And then along the left-hand side, we have the different ACPs. And if we go down, this is a heat map. So the darker the color, the greater the concentration of students in that particular area or proportion of students. And you'll notice that for math and sciences in 11-12, we start out with them being 8.2% of the population. And that usually causes a lot of heartburn and, oh my God, something is horribly wrong. The reason that this looks as small as it is, if you go down 2 rows, you'll see that none
Yeah.
is one of, in fact, in 11-12, it is the largest category in our
Yes.
group. The reason for that is back in that period of time, conversations about curriculum were focusing on transfer preparation.
Yes.
So students can say, their major is CSU certification or IGETC certification. So we don't know what their major is and what they're studying, just that they have an intent to transfer. And so that's why in those years, we see a large portion of those students being none. It doesn't mean that they didn't tell us that they had that they didn't respond to the question. They just told us something that we couldn't categorize into an ACP. And as you move along in time to the more recent years, you'll see that the math and sciences students take up a much larger portion of that population. Any questions about that?
I think this is also evidence that this guided pathway framework is actually working. There was a lot of non-declared measure at the time in 11, 12, which I think the conversation around the guided pathway framework was just starting at MiraCosta, if I understand the history correctly. But as we moved on from 2015, 2016, we started actually encouraging them to declare what the pathway they want to take. So by looking at 23, 24, you see a lot of more students who are actually, at least initially, they have declared what they want to study. So I think this, yeah.
Sorry, but bear in mind that 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14, the list that they had to choose from may also have been significantly shorter. True. So you may not, students may not have had the opportunity to change those. So I certainly don't want to say that we're not doing a fabulous job and guided pathways is solving this issue, but I want to make sure that
there are other variables.
There may be some other factors involved.
Definitely. I agree.
Okay. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of where our students are starting out in the different cohorts. The next table I've got here is kind of a standalone. I put it in there because it was interesting to me, but I don't necessarily know that it goes with the flow of this document, and later versions of this document may not include this. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at issues of representation. One of the things that we hear a lot about in conversations is that we have student populations that are underrepresented in the math and sciences, that there's overrepresentation of white and Asian students, and students of color may not be as well represented. We took a look at this using something called a proportionality index method of representation. And this is a simple ratio where basically we are comparing the proportion a specific group makes up in the overall student population and comparing that proportion with the proportion that's within that math and sciences group. And again, we're only talking about students based on their first declaration of their major. Other students may at a later point in time say they're math and sciences students, but all we can look at right now is just that first year. And so this is color coded. If it is pink, the ratio is 0.8 or less. If it's between 0.8 and 0.9, we say that there's some underrepresentation, but for our purposes, it may be a blip and may not be significant. If there's no color to it, there's what we call balanced representation. So we're close to 1, which is the goal in a lot of cases, but it may be slightly over or slightly under. And then anything over 1.04 we consider to be overrepresented. So we looked at the same group of students from the previous table and looked at them by ethnicity. And we can see consistent overrepresentation in terms of our Asian students. We see in our more recent years underrepresentation in terms of our white students. We see underrepresentation in terms of our Pacific Islander students, but we're really not seeing it in our African American and Latino students, which actually kind of surprised me. This is something I think we should continue to pay attention to, and to kind of do a fact check amongst you guys to see if that's your actual experience of what you're seeing in your courses, because we may have an issue where looking at that first major may not be indicative of the reality of what's going on in your classes. But from a data standpoint, this is what we're seeing. So as I said, it doesn't relate to any of the future tables, but I wanted to put it in there because I was curious and I was nosy.
It's very important. So actually, this very important. And exactly the way you describe it, the underrepresentations, overrepresentation is something that we really need to look at. And
Okay.
I love it that you share it with the reference population. That way, you're not living in this imaginary world that you only have 2% a student in one category and you want it to be 100%. It does not work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to get into the success and completion.
Mhm.
And we're going to talk about success and completion as the same thing, because ultimately we want to get them to a final degree, certificate, or transfer. One of the challenges that we have here is that a student's major in no way is tied to the degree they receive. So I can go in and tell you that I'm a biology student, and I could take nothing but music classes because biology scared me. So I take nothing but music classes. I have all the units to get my AA in music. I go to admissions and records. I file my application for graduation. They give me the award. On paper, it looks like I'm a biology student who didn't get a biology degree, but I'm actually a music student. So there's no checks and balances that go through that require students to actually get the degree or change the major to reflect what award you actually got in that particular thing. And one of the reasons for this is that, and we'll talk about this in a second, students can get multiple awards.
Yes.
In this file of 27,000 plus students that we looked at, we had students with as many as 10 different degrees. And when we talk about degrees, I'm talking about BS, AS, AA, and certificates of achievement, what we would term as terminal degrees. They're not the stacked degrees where we expect students, like the certificates of proficiency, where we would expect students perhaps to get a bunch of those as they explore different things. These are the ones where we say, okay, we have given you this certification. We expect you to move on and either go on to transfer, go into the workforce, etc. Okay. So we're going to go down a little bit. And the first thing we did is, again, we're basing this on students' first ACP declaration. And we looked to see, did they get a math and sciences award of any kind? And so, one
So,
really important thing on this is that when we say, did they get an award, we didn't put a time barrier on
okay,
this.
very good.
And so that these numbers will be very different than what you're going to see in the guided pathways dashboards, because they cut that off at 3 years. The goal is to get students through the program quickly, and students don't necessarily follow that timeline. So we are looking at this information over long periods of time. So somebody in 11, 12 is going to have almost a decade to complete a degree, certificate, or transfer, where somebody who's in the 1920 cohort may have only had those 3 years. So we may see differences as we get closer to present day. That does not mean that we are less successful now than they were back then. It's just that those students have had more time to achieve these metrics. And the other challenge with this data is when you don't put time frames on this, that means the data can change anytime. So if I reran these numbers today, it is possible, though slight, but there may be differences in there as more students are reported at other institutions. And when we talk about transfer, we get that data from the National Student Clearinghouse, which sends it to the chancellor's office, and then they match up the data with our students. It may take the four-year institutions more time to report our students back to us, so we may not have a complete picture, or the picture of a cohort, say 17, 18, 16, 17, those may change as those colleges do more reporting. The chancellor's office goes, oh, wow, okay, this student showed up back in 2016, so we're going to add that to the file. So there's a certain amount of squishiness, technical term, that's going to apply to this.
So when you look at 19.6%, this means over the last, since 11, 12 to now, 19.6
through 1920.
To 1920. Oh, 1920.
Yeah.
Roughly 20%, or 19.6% of the students who declared their first ACP as math and sciences have completed a math and science award. The award can be transfer, certificate, degree, any of those categories.
Right now, we're only looking at awards. We're not including transfer in this.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay.
That is super important because the transfer numbers are going to make things go way up, but we have some certain limitations about transfer that we'll talk about when we get to that section. We wanted to start out by saying, did they first declare a math and sciences ACP, and did they actually get any award? They may have gotten 10, but are one of those 10 a math and sciences award?
19.6%.
So 19.6% got it. And of those who started out not being a math and sciences student, but may or may not have later said it, it's about 3% who got a math and sciences award. Okay. This second table just reflects the numbers from these percentages.
Thank you.
Sure. And then this is the same group of cohorts over time. So we're looking at, and I can make this bigger if it's easier to see. Hang on.
That's perfect.
Just a moment. Okay. So, so now we're looking over time and seeing that consistently between 2 and 3-ish% of our students who didn't start out as math and sciences students wound up getting an award at a later point in time. They may or may not have declared that award. We'll talk about the ever students in a couple of minutes.
And roughly 19 to 20% who declare math and sciences, they got an award.
Right.
Roughly.
And so, and they got an award at MiraCosta. We don't know what they did elsewhere, but we know that they got an award at MiraCosta. Okay. Now we wanted to look at those students' first ACPs. So they first said they were a math and sciences student. Did they get any award, whether it was math and science, music, what have you? So any of those degrees or certificates, about 31% of them have achieved that award overall. And about 23% of those who got any award did not first declare as a math and sciences student. And again, here's the numbers that are these percentages are based on. And then we look at them over time. And we see that our math and sciences students have a higher percentage of completion than those in terms of a degree or certificate than those who don't say that their first award is a math or first major is a math and science student.
Great. But focusing on math and sciences. So yeah, correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we know that there are limitations for our first math and sciences students, but we wanted to see, okay, let's say I start out as a music student, decide that I really don't like music and I want to go into biology. So I switch my majors. So we are counting them if they ever declared a math and sciences major, have ever in their academic careers claimed that at any point in time. And did they get a math and sciences award? Okay. Excuse me. Now, there's a little bit of, again, squish with the timing, because I could get a math and sciences award and then later change my major to a math and sciences. So the timing is a little off, and that's why I didn't want to set specific time frame. Part of why I didn't want to set specific time frames, because we could lose some of these students. So about 21% of the students who ever reported that a major in the math and sciences area got a math and sciences award. 1% of those who never reported a math and sciences major, and that's about 200 students, actually got an award in that area. So we understand that when students tell us this is my major, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually going to do that, because we don't have guardrails in place, because we don't want to limit students, but we don't have guardrails in place to tie them to specific things and say, okay, you've declared this major, these are the courses that you're allowed to take. And again, the structure of this is going to go across the board the same. So now we follow these groups of students. Again, did they ever get a math and sciences major? And did they ever earn a math and sciences award over time?
Let's go down.
Okay. And then we did they ever get a math and sciences major? Did they ever declare it? And did they ever earn any award? And again, for those who ever reported a math and sciences major, 21%. Excuse me, 34% who ever reported a math and sciences major earned some kind of award, compared with 21% of those who never reported a math and sciences major.
Oh, yes, it's very different. Right. For one thing, I forgot to get the math and science award. I'm like, okay, so how is this different from the previous table? That was math and sciences. This is a much broader category, which is why the number went up.
And that's part of why I wanted to kind of talk this through, because I was going a number of different directions with this and slicing things different way. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute, where am I? Which one am I looking at right now? And does it make sense to me?
Yes, no,
Okay.
you have looked at it from many different filters, and yep.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And again, we're looking over time here.
Yep.
One of the interesting things I think is that we see kind of a decline as we get closer to 1920, which we would expect to see. But we see 14, 15, 15, 16 in a lot of these tables kind of were the high point. And so I'm curious to know what maybe we were doing back in that period of time that led eventually to these groups of students having greater percentages than their predecessors. So something to think about and talk about some of our interventions. Okay. Now we wanted to incorporate the transfer into this discussion.
Oh, excellent.
Transfer is, particularly for math and sciences students don't have to get a degree in order to transfer. They can go to public institutions like the CSUs and the UCs by completing transfer patterns. They could also go to a private institution and never declare a transfer pattern. So we are also limited in what we know about these students. We do not know whether or not they transferred and then studied at the next school in the math and sciences. We also don't know if they got a degree in math and sciences. So we're kind of limited there. So when we throw transfer into the mix, it gives us a clearer, but still a cloudy picture, because we don't know if a lot of those students decided to change their major when they switched schools entirely. So that can be somewhat problematic. So we take these percentages in the next tables with a certain grain of salt that these may not all be math and sciences students.
Right.
So again, we start with our first ACP is math and science, and they got a math and science award. So the same students that we saw in the first table, or they transferred. And so that bumps these numbers up to just under 44%. For those that are math and sciences students as their first award or first major, compared with those who did not have a math and sciences as their first major. And that's about 29%. And this also is a little challenging because transfer isn't a requirement for a lot, particularly in CTE. The goal is really to get into the workforce in a lot of cases. So we may not see as large a percentage in the quote unquote non-group because they don't have those transfer numbers in there as much as the math and sciences students are going to.
And here you're combining the award and transfer together, right?
Correct. So if they did any of the things, they got a terminal degree and or they transferred,
yep,
we're counting them in this group.
Right. We're looking at the union of the two. Yep.
So again, we look at students over time. And it's interesting to me that when you add in the transfers, we're at about 50% in some of our older cohorts. And that to have some sort of definitive outcome for these students, 50% is fantastic. I
That
think,
is brilliant, yeah.
in my opinion. Okay.
And it went down to 34%.
For those that did not, oh, well, yes, we're just under 35 here, but again, it takes students time to particularly to transfer. So we may have, these numbers are likely to change as we move forward in time.
And you're including award. I'm wondering if you just isolate the transfer, it's going to be a much smaller number then.
Oh yeah, it would be an absolutely much lower number.
Okay,
For sure.
you're kind of keeping the audience happy at the moment.
Well, no, I mean, if you want to, great. The reason that I didn't initially isolate transfer, hey, I'm a performer. I'm all about that. But
Yeah.
the,
I'm looking at the other table you had for the first ACP, but just award.
uh-huh.
I'm looking at 28.9%, like 34.8%. So our transfer rate is really small, but yes, but yeah, keep going, please.
Yeah. Well,
Let's keep ourselves happy.
Yeah, always happy. No, the reason that I didn't isolate transfer is that I couldn't definitively say
Yeah.
these are math and science students, these are not math and science students.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to put it in we know these are math and sciences students at some point and they had a positive outcome. We're not entirely sure that these are math and sciences positive outcomes, but they are of those students in the program.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And then we did it to first ACP to any award or transfer. So their first ACP is math and science, and then they got any award or they transferred. And so we're almost up to 48% for our first ACP students and 37% for our non-ACP students, non-math and sciences ACP
Right.
students. Okay. And then we looked at them over time. And we are seeing lower numbers in our more recent years. Again, they have less time to transfer or get to a four-year institution or earn their award. Okay.
Wow, 54% to 29.7%. That's
Yeah,
significantly.
which is really nice. And we have 54 and 13, 14. We stay roughly about 49, 15 until 16, 17. And then we're mid 40s for 17, 18 and 18, 19 and 19, 20. We're just under 40%. But again, that may be a reporting issue with our four-year institutions. So
Yeah,
as we refresh this data, then we're going to hopefully see those changes.
and 2016 was the AB 705 was implemented. Yeah, that's a different factor.
Oh yeah. Okay, that might be something to look at as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So then we look at, did they ever report math and sciences ACP? Did they get a math and sciences award? Again, we're at 44%.
So it went up a little bit.
Yeah. And those that never reported a math and sciences ACP, did they get a math and sciences award or transfer? That's about 30%. And I would assume that almost all of this percentage here is due to those transfers, because on our previous ones, it was in the 2%, 3% sort of thing.
Right.
So,
right.
Okay. And again, we follow them over time and we say, did they get a math and sciences award or transfer? So we see they ever had an ACP. Again, we're 49 to 50. And again, as we get closer, we see a low point of 33.8, but again, it could change.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we have ever reported a math and sciences ACP. And then did they get any award or transfer? And we're at 49.6 for those math and sciences students. About 3,000 students. And then when we look at over time, we see some bigger numbers. Again, these cohorts may be smaller in some cases in our earlier years, but to be over 50% pretty consistently for the first 6 years or 5 or 6 years of our cohort is pretty neat.
Yeah, but look at 56 versus 39.3%. The statistic, that's a significant decrease.
Yes, but also remember that these students may not have needed a transfer, so we're going to see a larger percentage in the ever reported a math or sciences ACP, because I may have come in and said, you know what, I'm going into automotive technology, and so my goal, I never have an expectation of transferring. I want to go straight into the workforce.
Yeah, true.
Oh, I'm not going to show up in these percentages. So we have to take it with a certain grain of salt when we're comparing those versus non. And we may at a point in time want to look at non-CTE or non-transfer oriented CTE programs, that so we have a more apples to apples type of comparison. But again, because students can change their majors from one moment to the next, there's no way to say definitively you are an X student. You are because they can change it from one moment to the next. And that is all the tables we've got. So this is kind of an overview of saying, okay, what happens to these students? Are these students completing their programs? Are they not? I would, in a completely wild guess, I would assume that somebody who comes in declaring a math and sciences related major is largely going, I would assume that not a lot of people would assume that a math and sciences related major is just a fun major that they're good. Some of us would, but it is a fun major that they're just kind of exploring, not really sure they want to do that. I would assume, and again, I have no empirical data to say this, but I would assume that these students are going to be more focused than students who may come in who are undecided, who are in general studies, that sort of thing. So they might be more inclined to get a degree and transfer. And the math and sciences students typically can't stop at a certificate. They're going to need to transfer depending on the type of career they want. So the fact that we have a larger percentage of transfers in this population isn't a surprise to me.
Right. Yeah, the outcome for this pathway is one of the major outcome is transfer.
Yeah.
Rather than if you go look at CT pathways, for instance, CSIT has a billion different certificates in their pathways.
Absolutely.
And their focus is not much. In fact, their focus, I don't think, is on transfer at all. And that would look very different, which brought me, as you were describing, another question came to my mind. It would be very interesting to look at this transfer rate, this any award transfer rate across the ACP pathways, because I'd be curious to see what would be the transfer rate for Soc and what's the pathway, sociology and whatever that category is. Versus
social and behavioral sciences.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Social and behavioral sciences versus business pathways versus math and sciences. I think it would be very interesting.
I think it would, but business is one of those that's really kind of squishy, because you have some students that are going the MBA track where they absolutely have an intention of transferring, and then others who may be wanting to start their own small business who not want that's a real tough one to do comparisons on. Social and behavioral sciences I think has a little more latitude, and I think would be a more appropriate comparison, but I don't know that I'd throw business in that same.
Yeah, true. And especially we have the business and technology, and CSIT falls under business technology. You're absolutely correct. When it comes to certificate, they go crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, again, squishiness that we want to make sure that we define things and can explain, okay, this is our rationale for including or excluding a particular comparison or group of students. For sure.
This is wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
This is amazing work. So if you don't mind, I get this recording and I have the file. I will share it with very much a lot of people who has asked me questions, and share with them the file and let them listen to your explanation. If there are more questions And if they have more ideas, I will definitely share them with you. And
Anytime, and if you'd like to have a larger meeting and go through this again, I'm happy to do that as well.
perfect.
Departmental meetings, anything, you name it.
Okay.
That's why we're here.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate you.
Not a problem.
And I'm sure I'm positive we're going to come up with a lot more questions. But these
Okay.
are very,
Think about it, cogitate over it.
yeah, this is a very good start. So thank you.
Good. Okay.
Much appreciated.